My lords, today I bring you a report regarding a race of aliens who appear to have willingly accepted a parasitic organism into their culture, embracing it and giving themselves over to it. Dr. Hermes Conrad, commanding the ISS Bessie, has been studying the dig sites that led us to this discovery. I shall detail his report now. Routine scans of the third planet in the Rogan system, deep within the Cygnus Delta cluster, have identified what appear to be abandoned settlements of a Bronze Age society. As a standard doctrine, I'm taking the ship into orbit of Rogan 3 in order to investigate further. Any insights we can gather from primitive civilizations are always valuable to the Commonwealth, and we speculate what manner of destruction could have taken this civilization. Within several days, the crew had made some astonishing discoveries on the surface of Rogan 3. The abandoned settlements first seen from orbit were once inhabited by a society of aquatics that still populate the planet, but have since lost all capacity for sapient thought. The why or reason is currently unclear, but seeing a devolution of this type without nuclear war being involved is incredibly rare. I'm eager to continue the investigation and figure out how these creatures devolved from a tool-making agrarian society to mere beasts. More news to report from the planet below. We have exhumed several burial sites belonging to the race of primitives, now designated the Decapodian. They are an aquatic species not unlike a humanoid lobster and display fairly typical primitive tendencies. However, we have discovered something potentially far more interesting. The burial remains of the settlement-dwelling aquatics possess a spinocranial organ not observed in their now bestial counterparts. Testing has revealed that these organs are in fact another species entirely, a sort of neural symbiont that connects with the host brainstem via an external attachment to the spine. These symbiotes can be found in hot springs on the planet's surface. It would appear apparent that when the aquatics pulled themselves out of the planet's seas and into these springs, a union was formed between the two organisms. This union between the two species appears to have triggered an uplift of the aquatics. However, the fact remains that a subsequent devolution occurred, and the Decapodians no longer appear to have any relationship with the Brain Slugs, as the crew have nicknamed them. Indeed, I intend to continue to investigate further, in the hope that these slugs can benefit the Commonwealth. We have harvested several of the creatures and brought them aboard the Bessie in order to experiment further. Roughly 60 days have passed since my last entry on the matter of the Brain Slugs, and I believe I have come to a conclusion regarding the nature of the creatures. I've determined that these slug-shaped creatures consist mostly of a complex brain in a resistant protein casing. Despite their neurological advancement, their lack of external organs and limited motor capacities make any attempt at communication exceedingly difficult. After many weeks of frustration, I made the decision that we must attempt to insert the slugs onto a host species in order to further investigate their capabilities. Thus, we began to experiment with introducing the creatures to an animal host. The aquatics these slugs once developed a relationship with were now far too aggressive to facilitate experimentation, so a number of substitute species from the surface were tested instead. Regrettably, the symbiotes appear to have either refused or were unable to attach themselves to any of the offered animals. My junior science officer hypothesized that the symbiotes will only accept a certain kind of host. Perhaps, importantly, a willing host. This reasoning seemed bizarre to my line of thinking. A benevolent parasite. How did the wonders of evolution get it there? However, they may be correct in their assessment, and I admit a growing frustration in my lack of success with current experiments. In order to get the truth of this, I intend to attempt to allow symbiosis with one of the slugs on a human subject. Myself, no less. After all, what might they do for me? Dr. Conrad initially reported the following regarding this joining. After an initial period of confusion and mild discomfort, I now begin to feel a notably increased intellectual ability when it comes to solving complex tasks. I have also begun basic communication with the parasite. It appears to be able to read my thoughts, and I, its thoughts. According to what I've learned from this creature, the symbiotes are hive minds with lifespans of a few hundred years. They claim their past union with the aquatics on Rogan 3 came to an end when their hosts grew unfoundedly suspicious of them. In fits of rage, the aquatics began tearing off their symbiotes and clubbing them to death. Dismayed by their host's actions, the symbiotes that survived retreated away from the aquatics, who without the neural stimulation of their slugs, devolved back into non-sapient beasts. Despite the official record, Conrad wrote the following in his personal log, and he did not, it would appear, share his misgivings with the crew. His personal log reads, "As I sit here and try and put this experience into words, I can't help but feel a sense of deep unease. Attaching that brain parasite was a choice I made with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. I hoped it could offer me something more than I already had. Little did I know the price I would pay. At first, the parasite's presence was subtle, almost imperceptible. It was like a whisper at the back of my mind, gently nudging my thoughts in a certain direction. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, my mind playing tricks on me, but as days turned to weeks, I began to notice changes. My emotions became muddled, as if the parasite was filtering my feelings through its own lens. Joy felt distant, and even sadness became an abstract concept. It was as if I was viewing life through a foggy window, disconnected from the world around me. Yet, at the same time, there was a strange allure to this detachment, an odd comfort in the feelings it provided. However, my thoughts were no longer solely my own. Ideas would pop into my head and I knew that they weren't mine. Foreign concepts and notions that I couldn't trace back to any of my experiences. It was like my mind had become a shared space, invaded by an entity that was slowly but surely overshadowing my own identity. I found myself losing track of time, sometimes spending hours in a trance-like state, unaware of the world passing by. It was during these moments that the parasite's influence was most palpable. It was as if I was giving in, willingly surrendering my sense of self to this insidious invader. And then there were the dreams, or perhaps I should say nightmares, vivid, unsettling visions that left me questioning my sanity. They seemed to be projections of the parasite's desires, manifestations of its influence over my mind. I was no longer sure where the parasite ended and I began. As time went on, I realized I was losing control. The parasite's presence grew stronger and began to overpower my own will. I became a mere passenger in my own body, watching as it made decisions for me, guided my actions, dictated my thoughts. It was a slow, agonizing surrender, a descent into darkness I had willingly invited into my mind. It would appear, based on that personal log, that all was not as it seemed. Though it went against all reason and regulation for a lead science officer and captain of a vessel to expose himself to such an insane risk, the event nevertheless happened. And needing little convincing, the majority of the other scientists aboard the Bessie followed suit, craving the so-called intelligence boost that these parasites had to offer, and were of course encouraged to do so by their commanding officer. It was at this point that the personal and official logs ceased to be uploaded. According to internal camera recordings aboard the vessel, it appears that within 2 weeks of implantation of Conrad, approximately 80% of the Bessie's crew had taken a symbiote, with only a select few continuing to uphold the Commonwealth's traditional xenophobia. At this point, the Bessie had set course back to the Sol system, heading directly for Earth, but it is clear all aboard were not aligned with Conrad's intentions. An open distress call was sent out, detailing the events that had occurred and requesting that the Bessie be terminated immediately, lest these parasites infect the wider human population. Admiral Miranda Wolfe was the first to pick up on this distress call. I shall detail her personal log of the event for you now. We picked up the Bessie's distress signal at 13:09 Standard Time. The message was clear and concise. The ship's crew had been compromised and needed immediate attention. I, with 3 escort destroyers, left the bulk of the fleet in command of Captain Echo and moved to intercept the Bessie. Upon arrival, we received open communication from Science Officer Hermes Conrad. He bade us board his ship and sample these brain slugs. The communication was terse. I ordered the ship to cease its travel and come about. Conrad declined, even after I made it clear that I would fire upon his vessel unless he heeded my warnings. I was met with simple silence, and thus ordered my tactical officer to disable the vessel. Unfortunately, due to an unconfirmed but likely secondary plasma coil explosion, the vessel with all crew was completely destroyed. My lords, As we often are, we must make a decision. Clearly, Admiral Wolf operated with the best interests of the Commonwealth, and I commend her actions. However, the question concerning what to do with the planet containing the parasites remains. I would suggest another scientific expedition, perhaps with a military component to keep the scientists in check. We could, of course, simply bomb the planet from orbit, purging the parasite, and with it any future risk of coercion. As ever, my lords, I leave the choice with you. Thanks for watching, folks. What choice would you make? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear the story that won my writing event, please click the video on screen now.